There is a sound that history forgot to record. It is not the thunder of 100,000 hooves beating against the steppe, nor is it the clash of steel meeting steel in the chaos of battle. Those are the sounds of war. And war is something humanity understands. No. The sound I am talking about is the silence that came after. When the fires finally stopped burning because there was nothing left to consume, when the screaming stopped because there were no throats left to scream, when the men who could fight were already dead, their bodies piled in heaps like refuse, and the women realized with a cold, sinking dread that for them, the war hadn't ended. It had just changed into something infinitely worse. What I am about to tell you isn't just a story about conquest. It is a story about the most efficient, calculated system of cultural genocide ever created by human hands. A machine so perfectly designed, so ruthlessly executed, that it didn't just conquer empires, it erased them from existence. At the center of this machine was a calculated, state-sponsored brutality aimed at one specific target: women. This is going to disturb you. It should. It must. Because approximately 16 million people alive today, people walking around New York, London, Beijing, and perhaps even you carry the genetic proof that it worked. Their DNA is a living record, a biological scar tissue of what happened when an entire civilization decided that terror wasn't just a side effect of conquest, but the primary weapon. And here is what makes your blood run cold. They didn't just stumble upon this strategy in a fit of rage. They refined it. They perfected it. They turned human suffering into a science, testing variables like scientists in a lab of horrors. By the end of this video, you will understand why cities with populations of 500,000 people, metropolises that rivaled modern capitals, simply vanished from history, leaving only dust. You will understand why entire languages went extinct, why cultures that had flourished for thousands of years ceased to exist within a single generation, and you will understand the horrifying role that women played, not as warriors or rulers, but as the targets of the most systematic campaign of cultural destruction the medieval world had ever seen. This is the Mongol terror machine. And once you see how it worked, you will never look at a history map the same way again. Let me ask you something that historians have debated for centuries, often missing the darkest truth. How did a nomadic people with a population of maybe 1 million living in felt tents, drinking mare's milk, constantly fighting amongst themselves, conquer an empire spanning from the Korean peninsula to the plains of Hungary? How did they subjugate kingdoms with populations 50 times their size, fortified cities with walls 50 feet thick, and economies that dwarfed their own? The answer isn't what you think. It wasn't just superior tactics, though they had those. It wasn't just the composite bow, though it was a marvel of engineering. It wasn't even the legendary discipline of the Mongol cavalry. It was terror, but not random. Chaotic terror. This was engineered terror. Terror as a technology. Terror as a weapon more powerful than any siege engine ever built. The evidence suggests they learned to perfect this system by trial and error, by testing different approaches, by measuring which specific atrocities made cities surrender fastest. They were scientists of suffering, and their laboratory was the known world. In 1219, before the invasion of Khwarezmia, a massive Islamic empire sitting on the Silk Road, Genghis Khan sent emissaries ahead with a simple message. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of fact. Whoever submits shall be spared, but those who resist, they shall be destroyed with their wives, children, and dependents. Notice the language. Wives, children, and dependents get their own clause. That is not accidental. That is the promise of something worse than death. This wasn't a threat made in anger. This was policy. This was advertised. And, critically, they wanted you to know what was coming. Fear. They understood. Travels faster than horses. Here is the brutal calculation. You have 50,000 soldiers. Ahead of you are 12 fortified cities. Each would cost you thousands of lives to take by force. Or you make an example of one city, just one, so horrific, so complete, that the other 11 open their gates without a fight. You spend your brutality once, like currency, and it purchases the surrender of a dozen cities. It is monstrous. It is evil. And it is mathematically brilliant. This is why they specifically chose cities known for their culture, their learning, their religious significance. Places like Nishapur, famous across the Islamic world for its poetry, its turquoise mines, and its mathematics. Or Merv, the queen of the world, one of the largest cities on earth at the time. Why these cities? Because the destruction had to hurt symbolically. It had to destroy hope. When you erase one of the greatest cities in the world, every other city thinks, if it happened to them, what chance do we have? When Nishapur fell in 1221, the Mongols didn't just loot it. They ordered a body count. Every single person was to be killed, and every head was to be piled in separate pyramids. One pyramid for men, one for women, one for children. The daughter of Genghis Khan's son-in-law, Tokchar, personally oversaw the execution of the women and children because her husband had been killed by an arrow from the city walls. She wanted to make sure the job was thorough. When archaeologists excavated the site in the 20th century, they found a layer of ash, several feet deep, covering artifacts from one of history's greatest cities. But here is what most documentaries won't tell you. The killing was the easy part. The killing was mercy. For the women who were spared, their nightmare was just beginning. The Mongol system for breaking conquered peoples wasn't random cruelty. This was a carefully orchestrated process. 5 deliberate acts executed in sequence, each designed to unmake not just a city, but a civilization. Let me walk you through each one. I am going to tell you about a weapon so effective that 800 years later, we can still detect its impact by analyzing the DNA of people living today. The systematic use of forced reproduction as a tool of genetic conquest. When a city fell, women weren't killed immediately. They were sorted like livestock, like treasure. The old were discarded or killed. The young, the beautiful, the noble, the daughters of kings and scholars were claimed. But this wasn't just about desire or lust. This was about replacement. Here is the strategy. When you force captive women to bear your children, you are not just conquering the present. You are conquering the future. Those children are raised Mongol. They speak Mongolian. They worship Tengri, the sky god. Their mother's language is forgotten. Her gods are forbidden. Her stories are lost in a single generation. It is annihilation without ruins. Genocide without graves. In 2003, A groundbreaking study by geneticists identified a Y chromosomal lineage that originated in Mongolia approximately 1,000 years ago. The estimate is staggering. 16 million men alive today carry this genetic signature. That is roughly 0.5% of all men on Earth sharing a single male ancestor from the Mongol imperial period. One genetic lineage spreading across Asia in just a few generations? This isn't natural population growth. This is the genetic signature of conquest on a scale the world has never seen before or since. But let's make this concrete. Let's strip away the statistics and look at the human cost. Imagine you are a Persian noblewoman in Nishapur in 1221. You are 23 years old. You have been educated in the finest schools. You read poetry by Omar Khayyam. You study astronomy. Your marriage has been arranged to a prominent merchant's son. A union of two great families. Then the Mongols come. The sky turns black with smoke. Your husband is killed defending the walls. Your father is executed in the square. Your brothers are heads in those pyramids outside the city walls. You are pulled from your home, your silk robes torn, and examined like a horse at auction. A Mongol officer claims you don't speak his language. He doesn't care about your name. He doesn't care about your poetry. 9 months later, you give birth to his child, a son. He takes the baby from you. The child will be raised in a jur, a felt tent on the steppe. He will learn to ride before he can walk. He will kill with a bow before he can read, if he ever learns to read. He will never know your poetry. He will never pray in your language. He will never even know what city his mother came from. That is the first act of erasure. You continue to breathe. But everything you were, your lineage, your culture, your future is already dead. And this happened to tens of thousands of women. City after city. Nation after nation. But the Mongols understood something crucial. You can't just erase a people's future. You have to destroy their present. You have to break their spirit so completely that they lose the will to resist. That is where the second act comes in. And it was performed in public. On purpose. As theater. There is a reason why psychological humiliation is considered one of the most devastating forms of warfare. The Mongols perfected it at an industrial scale. They understood that a culture's honor was inseparable from the protection of its women. The Mongols identified this as a pressure point and applied force with surgical precision. Let me tell you about February 13th, 1258, when Baghdad fell. This wasn't just any city. This was the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, the center of Islamic civilization, home to the House of Wisdom, where scholars had preserved and advanced human knowledge for 5 centuries. The Mongols under Hulagu Khan besieged the city. When the walls fell, estimates suggest between 200,000 to 1 million dead. The Tigris River reportedly ran black with ink from destroyed books, then red with blood. But here is where the true genius of Mongol psychological warfare reveals itself. The women of the Caliph's palace, women who had never been seen by public eyes, who lived their entire lives in seclusion, who were considered almost holy in their privacy, were dragged into the streets. Their veils were torn away. Their clothing was stripped, and they were paraded through the markets like cattle. These were the mothers, wives, and daughters of the man who claimed spiritual authority over hundreds of millions of Muslims. To see them exposed, humiliated, degraded, It wasn't just an assault on those individual women. It was a message to the entire Islamic world. Your leaders cannot protect even those closest to them. Your God did not intervene. Your civilization is already dead. You are just still breathing. The women were then sold in slave markets, some for as little as a single silver coin. The price wasn't about economics. It was about contempt. For the men who survived, this was a wound that never healed. You didn't just lose the war. You lost your identity as a protector. And here is what makes this calculated. The Mongols didn't do this everywhere. Cities that surrendered early were often spared. The humiliation was advertised ahead of the army. Surrender. And you keep your dignity. Resist. And we will make sure your grandchildren feel ashamed to speak your name. This is terror as technology, as a system. But we are only at the second act. I am about to describe a siege tactic so brutal that when Persian historians first recorded it, readers assumed it must be exaggeration. But multiple sources confirm it. The tactic was called kashar in Persian. Translating to human cattle or living boards, the Mongols would conquer City A, then keep captives alive, not out of mercy, but for logistics. When besieging City B, these captives would be driven forward at sword point toward the walls. Women with babies, elderly people, children, all forced to advance in the first wave. As the Mongol army assembled behind this human barrier, the defenders on the walls faced an impossible choice. Shoot and kill your own people, your neighbors, your kin, or hold fire and watch the Mongols advance siege equipment using human shields. Either choice destroyed morale. This tactic achieved multiple objectives: physical protection for Mongol soldiers, psychological warfare that gave defenders no good options, and practical efficiency as the bodies of those who fell were piled into moats, literally used as fill to create ramps for siege towers. If you were a captive woman, your final purpose might be to fall into a moat and have your corpse used as a bridge, so the men who enslaved you could walk over your dead body to enslave the next city. You weren't a person. You were construction material, an expendable resource measured in bodies. The Persian historian Juvayni recorded multiple instances of this. The Secret History of the Mongols references it. Chinese and Russian sources described the same practice. Archaeological excavations have found mass graves at the base of city walls, people killed by defensive fire from above. Mixed with Mongol arrows from behind, the human shield was doctrine. If you survived the siege, your reward was a 1,000-mile death march to be sold in a slave market. Welcome to the fourth act. The greatest forced migration in human history. The Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific to Eastern Europe. It ran on a currency more valuable than silver: human beings. After each conquest, the sorting began. Skilled artisans were sent to Karakoram to build the Khan's palaces. Strong laborers were sent to work camps, but women, especially young women, were the most sought-after commodity in slave markets. When Genghis Khan invaded the Khwarezmian Empire, the population dropped from 15 million to less than 7 million. Where did those 8 million people go? Many died. Yes, but many were marched to slave markets across Asia. Women from Uzbekistan ended up in Mongolia. Women from Baghdad ended up in China. The Mongol Empire created the most efficient slave trade system since Rome in Samarkand. Slave markets became permanent institutions with standardized pricing and even warranties. If a slave died within the first month, you could get a refund. These markets existed for generations. By the late 13th century, there were merchants whose entire business across multiple generations was buying and selling human beings. A woman from Nishapur could end up sold in China. 4,000 miles away, her children would never know her homeland. Her grandchildren wouldn't even know what language she had spoken. Entire ethnic groups were scattered so thoroughly they ceased to exist as identifiable peoples. We have covered 4 acts: biological replacement, public humiliation, human shields, and continental scale trafficking. But there is a 5th act, and it might be the most disturbing because it is the one that worked most completely. The 5th act is the erasure of memory itself. When the Mongols burned cities, they specifically targeted the people who held cultural knowledge. Poets were killed. Historians were executed. Religious scholars were eliminated. Anyone who could preserve and pass on cultural knowledge was considered a threat. In Baghdad, the House of Wisdom was destroyed. Books were thrown into the Tigris River in such quantities that chroniclers said you could walk across the river on a bridge of floating pages. Why target these people? But they must be told, because the women who suffered these atrocities died twice. Once in body, and once when their stories were forgotten. History remembers empires for their borders. But we must remember the Mongols for something far more unsettling. Their legacy isn't just carved into chronicles or ruins. It is etched into us. About 16 million men alive today carry a genetic signature that traces back to those campaigns of conquest, fear, and absolute domination. 16 million living reminders of what happens when a civilization weaponizes terror with precision and turns brutality into strategy.